V-shaped valleys are found in the upper course of a river system, and they're dominated by what's called vertical erosion. Vertical erosion describes the direction that the erosion is taking place, and it's mainly two processes that are involved in this vertical erosion. One is corrosion, where bedload is rubbing against the riverbed, and the second one is the sheer force of flowing water downhill when in flood has a lot of power, which can get into weaknesses in the rock and lift bedload out of the riverbed. V-shaped valleys begin their development as gullies. Gullies form from rills. So what we have is in the hills, we have a lot of rain. We know that the rain will either flow over the surface, as surface runoff, into the channel, or some of it will infiltrate in, flows through, float into the channel, but we're concentrating on the water that's on the surface. It will form tiny little channels called rills. As the water runs through the surface, it'll just wash particles of soil away, and it'll form this tiny, thin rill, this little groove in the hillside. Over time, what happens is that rills will widen and deepen to form gullies. Now, this is done by a process of what's called corrosion. So what we have, if we cut through the valley, is we've got our little tiny rill, and that over time our rill will develop to form into a deeper gully. So we have intense rain equals surface runoff. What this does is this washes soil particles, which forms thin channels, which are called rills. Over time, due to corrosion, which is rocks, sand, gravel, etc., rubbing the riverbed, is that rills deepen and widen to form a gully. That's the first stage. The second stage is that the gully becomes this V-shaped valley. And what we've got to remember is that high up is cold. So if we're looking through the hill, what we've got is this is our soil, and our river's running downhill, and below our soil we have our bedrock, but we've got cycles of freezing and thawing, so in winter and then in summer. This causes rocks to crack, so this causes frost shattering. Second thing is that high up, so we've got high rainfall. And this goes back to biosphere. So that what we have is that we have these pore spaces. So over time, the soil will saturate like that. So top bit is relatively dry. The rest of it is full of water. This pore space is, you know, they've been filled up with water now. What we've got is we've got soil that's now saturated. So what happens is that there is a loss of surface friction because the water acts as a lubricant. So what happens is that these grains of soil are not in contact with each other, they're surrounded by water, and then gravity takes over and causes the slope to fail in a mud flow or a slump. So the sides of the valley will fail. So what that'll look like is so this area is the area that's going to get saturated. It's going to fail. The bedrock is all has been frost shattered and cracked. When you add the water in, the soil's saturated, the rock's saturated. There's nothing to hold the rocks together. The surface tension, the surface friction has been removed. You've got too much water in the soil. Gravity takes over, and the whole slope gives way. What we're then got is we then move into how the valley continues to then deepen and widen. So we've then got a more mature stage. So in the third stage, we've got the valley is now even deeper than before. We're still going to have the soil failing and the rock failing because it's still going to crack, still going to be lots of rainfall. But what we've got is that the valley has deepened and the valley has widened. So the river cuts down due to corrosion, which we've already mentioned, and hydraulic action. And rocks that are transported in the river or material that has fallen from the sides into the river, material from mud flow or slumps, they're used to cause abrasion. So that is our corrosion. So these rocks will rub against the sand, will rub against the load, and it'll just be acting like a saw. It'll just be cutting and cutting and cutting deeper and deeper down, causing the valley to become much, much steeper, deeper and wider. What we're left with then is that this process then just repeats. It just repeats and repeats and repeats, and the valley gets deeper and wider and steeper, deeper and wider and steeper, deeper and wider and steeper. And you end up with this, what are known as these V-shaped valley, but with these, what are called interlocking spurs. So the spur, which are interlocking, is just resistant rock that the river has to flow around. And that's a quick run through for a V-shaped valley.